Good evening. This is the taped recording of the webinar that was on Thursday, April 23rd on how to teach your children. I'm retaping the webinar, so you're not going to enjoy the live components of the audience or the audience questions or participation. Unfortunately, the slides did not project the entire time that I was doing the webinar. So I wanted to redo it so that those watching this on YouTube could enjoy the full set of slides along with the narration. In addition, I'm sure people who attended the webinar would enjoy seeing the full set of slides. So this is what I'm presenting in this video format. To get started, we told a story about a parent who was enduring the quarantine with their children. And in the beginning of all of this, we might have been thinking at first, we'll be home for a week. We can do this. We've got this. We'll figure this out. We start to see, okay, this is not happening for a week. This is actually happening. Okay, let's get everything set up. We start to engage with our children in their distance learning programs, which are continually evolving. We start to get to work. We are in our homes. We are figuring that out. And in the middle, we start to feel that this is crazy. What are we doing? Is this even worth it? What is happening here with all of this work? And I don't even know how to teach this. I don't know how to support this. And we start to ask professionals around us. We ask our pediatrician, we ask our teachers, we ask the different people in our child's life who've always helped us before, is this the way we should do it? And what we get back are a myriad of perspectives and answers, and it really couldn't be more confusing. And we start to feel and we start to ask, could anyone be on the same page? And right now, we're all feeling like we just need to figure out what we absolutely need to do. Just tell me what I need to be doing here. There seems to be too many options and too many different perspectives and so many ideas coming at me. And so the purpose of this webinar is to hopefully simplify and engage you, the parents, in some productive ways of thinking about supporting your children right now. So my name is Mary Neely. I'm the founder of Evolved Education. I am a learning specialist. I'm a permanently certified special education teacher of K-12. I'm also the parent of 3 children who are all in different schools. And so I really do understand that story. It is definitely mine. So I know what you're saying. You're saying, give it to me straight. What do I need to do right now? What do I need to do right now? And that is exactly what we're going to explore. As an exercise, I'm asking everyone in the audience to take a moment right now and take a sheet of paper and perform this exercise. It truly does impact the way that you think and the way that you parent your children. So I want you to imagine your child. Write your child's name down on a piece of paper or type it into your phone if you're listening right now, or if you're driving and listening to this, please don't do that. But when you get a moment, write down your child's name. Now imagine that they're 25 years old or in their early adulthood, and what do you want them to be like? Give me some adjectives. What do you want them to be like? What do you want your relationship to be like with them and them you? What do you hope their education has provided? So take a moment and really just write down some of your thoughts, some of your ideas around this, some of your visions, dreams, hopes. What do you want them to be like? What do you want your relationship to be like? What do you hope their education has provided? And during the webinar, we shared some of our ideas, and I shared that my hope for my children, at least from my perspective, is I would really like them to be engaged in their lives, in their worlds, connected to their communities. I would love for our relationship to be a place where we can dialogue around problems and I can help them and they would come to me and talk with me about things that were on their mind. And I was hoping that their education would have provided them exposure to lots of ideas and really building lots of tools in their toolbox to deal with all of the things they might be having to deal with, including things like this that are happening to us right now. And then we go into mind matters. So I want you to kind of think a little bit about what kind of a mind are you making? And we explored a couple of different typical learning activities and what is that doing for a person's brain. So when a child is learning how to read and decode words and then starts to tie those words to meaning, what it is doing to the brain is it is activating the language capabilities for that particular child. And that child is able to engage in thinking on different levels as they continue to develop their vocabulary and their understanding and the meaning of more complex language. And similarly, in math, we learn that numbers have quantities, and then we learn more sophisticated concepts related to different kinds of numbers. And we learn what happens when we put numbers together and when patterns happen, and we problem solve. The kind of mind we're making is a mind that has connections and it has the capability to think more deeply within the different exercises and topics that we engage in. I was telling a story to the audience about a to-do list, and I was saying that I had a staff that I hired this January, and it was my first experience really managing a staff. And I had originally organized the staff in a way that would cause them to all get a to-do list, and they would get certain tasks assigned to them each week from a system that we use. I thought this was the way that I would delegate the different tasks that I needed to do, especially as we scaled up our work. And what I quickly realized in action was that as I gave the staff their to-dos, they would quickly get through those tasks. However, at the end of that list, they were done and they were looking around for the next thing to do. And they were coming back to me and asking me for more things to do. And I was struggling because I had my own work to do and I really couldn't just stop and give them something else to do. And this concept is so important when we teach our children because we often are giving our children to-do lists. We're often giving them things to do. And without a real connection to something greater, something bigger, something that I'll explain in a minute, it can be very difficult for those children to truly own their learning experiences and progress in a meaningful way forward. And I also would question whether that is the mind that we want to be building in our children to begin with. Someone who can just follow directions without thinking is not the kind of mind that we want to be building. So we talked about my solution to this problem that I had, and that I was reading and listening to podcasts, and I came across a podcast that was related to a concept of a self-managed team. And this was very exciting to me because a self-managed team sounds so intriguing. I listened to the episode and I found such great content and ideas in it. One of those ideas had to do with the fact that you give your staff responsibilities and they use tools that you provide them to meet those responsibilities, but really they also have a place and a space to grow and to really think about how they're going to go about meeting those responsibilities. And the way they may do that is going to be different than the way I would do that, but it's all getting to the same end point. And I really think that this concept is exactly what we as parents in the teaching role can bring into our work, in that we can provide our kids with responsibilities and we can give them the grace and the space to work through those responsibilities. However, they would like, instead of demanding that they get A, B, and C, and D done. So I sort of left that conversation around the to-do list versus the responsibilities. And then we started talking about leading with life skills instead of subjects and tasks. So in the same way that I'm thinking about this to-do list and this responsibility concept, I'm thinking about our kids and how often when parents think about teaching their kids, they think about teaching reading and writing and math and getting this assignment done and getting that assignment done and making sure that all of the curriculum is 100% learned by the end of the school year. And in fact, a more successful way of thinking about supporting your child's learning development may come from a more macro tip or macro viewpoint, if you will. And that is really what I wanted to present and get into in this video and webinar, in that if we lead with life skills instead of subjects and tasks, I really strongly believe that parents are going to have much more successful time in the teaching role for their students. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. Before I did that, I do want to talk a little bit about child development. No parent comes into parenting knowing about child development, and it is part of the professional development that happens for parents. So I just thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about, as you teach your children, it is important to tap into their development so that you can prime your instruction for where they are. So for example, in the 6 to 8 year old range, we have children that are showing rapid development of mental skills. And this is a prime time to be teaching reading and mathematical concepts that are around number sense and foundational patterns and, spatial reasoning, those kinds of things, because there is such a rapid development of mental skills. We can also really tap into the different ways that they are eager to describe their experiences and talk about their thoughts and feelings. And they start to grow their perspective around others and in the world. Once we're in the 9 to 11 years, we can increase their attention span and have them reading for 1 to 1.5 hours of sustained work time. We can help them become more independent with work and executive functioning. We talked a little bit about executive functioning because some parents don't know the word. And the best way to describe executive functioning is to say that it's a regulatory piece of the brain functioning that allows us to get our tasks done, that allows us to learn successfully. It's the ability to remain focused, to organize, to plan, to set a goal and persevere toward it, to be regulated and ready to learn, and to be able to be engaged in a successful learning process, right? It's a full process. And so certainly by the time we're 9 to 11 years old, we can really build up that executive functioning piece and help them, the students, to become more independent with their learning and demands that of them. We can also help them to begin to see other points of views more clearly. And this is when we're reading, we can talk about different characters and what's happening with them. We can talk about math problems, having multiple types of answers and approaches. Once we're in the 12 to 14 range, we can talk about having more ability for complex thought, and we can talk about having a stronger ability to express feelings through thinking and developing a stronger sense of wrong and right, and really talking about those evaluating type concepts and analysis. So what are high impact areas for learning, and how much do you know about them? So that was a question I posed, and some people in the audience were talking about reading. And I know that we all feel that reading is really fundamental and it's such a high impact area for learning. And I just urged everyone to bring it out a little bit further out into a more macro viewpoint of learning development instead of, again, getting into the subjects. And what I propose as a way to think about parenting right now, and even if it wasn't right now, I still think this is a really interesting way of thinking about teaching our children, is to really think about key aspects of learning development that parents can focus on. And they have to do with perspective taking, communication, and purpose. And I wrote an article. If you want to do a deeper dive than I'm going to explain right now into these concepts, you can go to our website. That's www.evolveded.com. And in the blog section, I wrote an article that really goes into each of these ideas and gives specific ideas on what you as a parent can do to foster these areas of learning development in your child. So, but I'm just right now going to explain where my thought process is in including these as the major focus points for how to teach your children. So in terms of perspective taking, this is a crucial learning piece of development in that you can work on perspective taking from a very early age all the way through adulthood. And you can do it in different ways that are really developmentally appropriate. Like, for example, when you have a kindergarten student, you might be able to take colors and put them together to make other colors and show your child how those perspectives of color are different. And you can bring it into reading, and you can talk about how different characters might experience a story differently. And then you can bring it into math, and you can talk about how the mathematical concepts of addition could be done in one way and it could be done in another way. So perspective taking can bring you throughout curricular areas and curricular development. And by really focusing on that skill, you can get at reading, you can get at skills within all of the subject areas. But even more importantly, the perspective taking concept and that developmental learning piece can help your child to develop key lifelong learning skills that will carry them throughout their entire trajectory of life as a learner. Communication is the next area, and communication is a very important piece for all kids to be working on, and parents can play a crucial role in this development by, of course, reading to your child. You can definitely read books and have your child read. We talked a little bit in the webinar. There were some questions around the challenge around a child who's learning to read and yet has a higher interest level, and how boring and hard it can be just to learn those decoding skills when the interest levels are not there. And so what I said to that was just to name what's happening and really identify that right now there could be two different experiences happening within the literature experience, one of them being the decoding work and the other being more high level thinking and conversation and exposure to really interesting texts. And that's really okay. And that's part of the process for many students. And communication, and if you're thinking as a parent, like, I really want to build the communication skills for my child right now, and what could that look like? You could go around the table at dinner and tell a story, and everyone in the table could tell a different line of that story. And you could urge your child to talk about and give your child language for what's happening right now with this crisis. We talked in the webinar a good amount about writing, particularly because it's a passion of mine to teach. And we talked about how important it is that kids learn the positivity and the power of writing, and how it really is the voice that they leave. If they're able to write, it's the voice that they leave in the world to share what's going on inside of their brains. There's no other medium besides, now, of course, we have videos and podcasts and things of that kind, but I would argue that's writing too. It's just in a different form. You have visual ways of writing. You have words that are writing. All of these things are very important for us to celebrate in our homes and to really encourage those skills to come about. There was a good question from the audience about writing that had to do with the question on whether or not the mom should correct the writing that the child does in their journals. And to this, I said, well, it's really a separate process, writing versus correcting or editing. It's a separate part of the process. And so what I urged her and the group to do was to teach their children the writing process, which includes planning, organization, writing, revising, and editing, and to talk about where the child is in that process so that the editing can happen at the appropriate time. So if the child is still writing and not really in the editing stage, then let the child write, let them invent their spelling and let them get their ideas out on paper. And following the writing, we can revise and then we can edit the work. I do think there's value in teaching children the editing process and teaching them the proper spelling for words and punctuation, organization, capitalization. All of those things are important for the child to learn, but it's a process. And that's a little skill and tip that we kind of covered in the webinar. So if you focus on communication, you're focusing on writing. You're also, you could focus on math as well, in that you could ask your child to explain different concepts that they're learning. You could ask them to share their approaches in words and communication. You can ask them to draw a diagram and to show you the different types of the quantities and what's happening to them when they multiply or divide. Challenge them to really develop those conceptual pieces that are tied to language. And it's also a tip that I gave in the webinar to tell parents that you could always write to your children. You can email your children. You could write a journal back and forth. One of my children loves to do that, where we write a little letter and then he'll write back. And it's an opportunity just to share that writing process with your child. So that's what I would focus on in communication. And again, I have more ideas that are in the blog. And then we talked about purpose and how important it is to instill a sense of purpose and connection among the work. There were many questions in the webinar about what to do when your child is not connected to the work that's coming from online distance learning. And to that I said, well, it would be great to investigate how connected they feel to the work as one point. Of course, there could be other things that are happening, but that is an important piece. And if they're not feeling connected, it's great to try to bring in something that will be connective. There were ideas that we presented in the webinar that had to do with games. So I was talking about one of my students was reading a book on the Oregon Trail last year, and it was not super fun or positive or successful. And so we started playing the Oregon Trail game. And through that experience, he was able to understand a good amount of the traveling and all of the different obstacles that were going on. It was very engaging. And I was able to bridge him back to the book, and things in the book made more sense to him. And he really had more connections to make. So he was more invested in it. So similarly, if your child is getting work from school and it's just get it done, to-do list mentality, right? Bringing it full circle, it's not going to be as effective to have your child feel that sense of purpose and that sense of connection between what they're being asked to do and what their kind of heart is connecting to. So if you can bring in anything that will connect around the work for them, I do believe that will be really helpful. And it will teach them a life lesson, which is always that if you're feeling dysregulated, you're feeling as though you don't have a compass or or a way to go, having that purpose and bringing in purpose into your life is a very, very valuable lifelong learning lesson. And it's something that you can instill through all of the curricular work that you do with your kids, but you can also do it with things that are outside of school that you, the teacher, the parent teacher, if you will, are going to have the opportunity to deliver in a way that a classroom teacher would not necessarily, right? So that's just some of those kind of key concepts that I thought is really helpful. Interestingly, was I was writing this webinar, I started to really think about my own kids in these macro tips and these macro concepts, and it was so helpful. I started to feel less anxious about whether or not they were progressing in their reading at this moment or writing. And I started to focus on these larger aspects of their learning development. And what I found is that we were actually starting very quickly to have success within the very things I was worried about, to be honest. So because we were approaching those things in a more successful way. So I also covered in the webinar some teaching pieces, and I did this because I wanted to share some terms that you may hear as a parent who's home teaching with their children now. And you may Google and you might say, how do I teach my kid? And some of these things will come up. And I wanted to share that it's important as a parent to realize that your role is very different than a classroom teacher's role with your child, in that you're the parent and there's going to be an important relationship that's formed between you and your child that is much more complex than a classroom teacher. And I sort of cautioned parents to understand that your child is looking to you as the parent for affirmation, for unconditional love, for the ability to break down and just be vulnerable and share things that are really hard and difficult. And you are also the teacher, and you're the teacher of life, not just school. And you may develop curriculum maps, you may write objectives and lesson plans and develop learning experiences for your child. But if you feel as though those particular tasks and engagements are interfering with your child's overall confidence or, well-being and development in those areas, then it's going to affect their learning. And I have seen that it is important to just keep your hands on the pulse as you're moving forward. I do think it's possible to teach your children. I happen to teach my children in some ways. I do usually talk with them about it first, and I name it first. And I say things like, I'm putting on my teacher hat right now. Is that okay if we do that? I'm going to teach you what I would like you to know about here. And I also am okay if they say, I really would rather ask my teacher, or, I'd rather figure this out on my own. I think that those kinds of approaches are rather healthy. So we also talked about other terms such as, let me just quickly define this. So curriculum map is when you go through the curriculum as a whole and you map it out so that you know how everything actually links together. Then there's an objective, which is what we state in the lesson that we want the child to learn and come out of the lesson being able to do. Then we have a lesson plan, which actually has different components to it. Usually there's some kind of hook or connection to prior knowledge. And then there's an experience in which the child is learning the concept. And then there's some kind of assessment to figure out if the child has progressed and learned. And then we talked about scaffolding, which has to do with, learning experiences next. So learning experiences is anything that sort of is what it says it is, but it's, anything that the child is doing to acquire the skill and to make sense of it, make that meaning. And there's some complexity to all of this. Obviously, teachers spend years in school learning these different concepts. So I'm just sort of peripherally going through them. But scaffolding is a concept that you as a parent can definitely know about and definitely use. And I described it as a ladder that has rungs going up, and the rungs might get thicker or wider as you go up the ladder, because at the very beginning of a scaffold, you'll start teaching your child something at a very basic level, almost like spoon feeding them the content in the very, very basic level. And then you'll add layers of complexity to it as you go along. So for example, as a writer, you might learn how to write a basic sentence, I go. And then you might add layers of complexity to it each time where you add an additional, direct object. So I go there, whatever you want to say, right? And so you're sort of adding different layers of complexity to the situation. So if you find that your child is overwhelmed in distance learning, it may be that there's too much information coming in at one time. I know I had a parent text me this week, and she was trying to help her child figure out the mean, median, and mode. And those are three really, really difficult concepts for a kid to learn. And often they're grouped together, and often they're spending, one class on it. So it's no wonder that a child would sort of melt down upon trying to grapple with three pretty difficult concepts that they're supposed to learn in 30 minutes. So it's great if you could just scaffold it for them, or, offer them a video and then a couple other things to look at so that they have a couple of experiences to learn the material. We also talked about the effectiveness of I do, we do, you do, which is really helpful way of teaching, in that I do this, you can watch me do it, I'm going to model it for you, we do it together, and then you do it on your own. Then in writing, we do this a lot where we teach exemplars. We show a student an exemplar of writing. This is where you're going. This is the ideal piece of writing. And then we do that writing together, and then we have the student do the writing on their own. And of course, it's very important in every teaching piece to make meaning and to try to help the student to keep meaning. To succeed at parenting right now, we have to adopt the mindset of, given categories to focus on, I can celebrate and promote my child to learn well. So this is sort of where I wanted everyone to be digesting and really making meaning of all of these ideas I'm presenting here. So I also offer consultations with parents. So if you'd like to book one, I do have a business that offers tutoring and consulting services. And I'm always happy to talk shop with parents and come up with solutions that are really customized to what they need to help their students. And I would just put this in here to do some advertising. And then I just ask parents in closing to write down some things that they were taking away from the webinar and what they were going to do differently tomorrow with their children. And the responses on the chat were diverse and really, really wonderful to hear all of the different connections that parents were making around these concepts. And I think that was about it. This is how you can find me if you'd like to follow me more. Every Friday, I do a live on Facebook at the Evolved Education website. I talk with parents about current events and different tips. So if you need any support, you can go there live, but you can also visit it after and see the videos. They're posted there forever, so you can watch them whenever you want. I hope you found this helpful, and I again urge you just to go on our website to check out the article that goes along with this webinar. It is at the way bottom of the page. The blogs are down there, and you can just click on the latest one regarding this webinar.